Mr. President, I come to the floor today to bring attention to suicide prevention, an issue of tremendous importance to families and communities across Indiana and our country. The Senate will be introducing a resolution very soon, recognizing suicide as a serious public health problem and expressing support for designation of September as National Suicide Prevention Month. Every year we lose nearly 45,000 Americans to suicide. It's the 10th leading cause of death in this country and second leading cause for those aged 15 to 34. Think about that for a moment. 45,000 lives every year, 123 lives every day, one life every 12 minutes. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention champions the message, be the voice, stop suicide. Whether we're senators or family or friends or coworkers or even strangers, we can all play a role in helping to prevent suicide. We all must be the voice. So what is our voice? It's formally recognizing Suicide Prevention Month. That's a start. I'm proud to have co-sponsored that resolution. But it can't just be about a day or a week or a month that we pause to reflect. This is a heartbreaking challenge for our communities. We must be working year-round and across the aisle. There's no Democrats or Republicans in this, to find the solutions that provide Americans with the help they need to get through the most trying times. Over the past several years, Congress has found a number of bipartisan solutions to help address this tragic problem. But our work is far, far from done. There's still 45,000 Americans every year. Their families, their friends. They need our help. They need our action. As I started my time here in the Senate, I made it a focus to find bipartisan approaches to suicide prevention. In Indiana, suicide claims over 1,000 lives every year. That's one Hoosier lost every 8 hours. In 2013, my fellow Hoosier, Jeff Sexton, reached out to me to share the tragic story of his son, Jake. Specialist Jacob Sexton, an Indiana National Guardsman, tragically took his own life in 2009 while on leave from a deployment to Afghanistan. His story is far too familiar for active and Guard and Reserve service members, and for veterans as well. Despite representing less than 10% of the population, these Americans comprise almost 20% of the suicides. Their communities lose over 7,000 members every year as they struggle with the stresses of the military service that we as a nation and as a Congress asked of them. So the question is, what can we do to help them and prevent these tragedies? Hoping to answer that question, the first bill I introduced here in the Senate focused on suicide prevention in the military and in our veteran communities. Introduced in 2013, signed into law in the 2014 Defense Authorization Act. My Jacob Sexton Military Suicide Prevention Act addressed a critical gap in mental health care for our troops. All too often, many of our service members would go years without any mental health assessment, without a medical professional going, "How are you doing? How are you feeling?" If you're feeling a little off or a little unsure, we have all the means you need to get help. Congress worked together to pass that bill into law. Now we've ensured every service member, active, Guard, and Reserve alike, receives an annual mental health assessment. A professional look to make sure the member isn't fighting a battle he or she can't win on their own. That's why I was pleased to hear from every service secretary and chief last fall that annual mental health assessments have been 100% implemented throughout the services. Even with an avenue for help, though, many service members were cautious about reaching out for assistance. They feared the stigma could hurt them professionally or personally. They feared repercussions to their deployability, their promotions, their security clearances. So we also made sure to include privacy protections as a part of the Sexton Act. It's critically important these brave men and women who came forward can get the support they need without suffering professionally for just seeking help. Building upon the Sexton Act, my service member and veteran mental care package, which was signed into law as part of the National Defense Bill in 2015, is a three-part bipartisan effort to ensure service members and vets have access to quality mental health care, whether they seek it through a provider in their community, Department of Defense, or Department of Veterans Affairs. First, the Military and Veteran Mental Health Care Provider Assessment Act guarantees that the Department of Defense primary care and mental health providers are trained to recognize signs of suicide risk and other mental health care best practices. Next, the Community Provider Readiness Recognition Act developed a new designation for community health care providers that demonstrate a strong knowledge of military culture and medical treatments focused on service members and veterans, specifically pertaining to mental health. Finally, the Frontline Mental Health Provider Training Act helped the Department of Defense establish a pilot program to expand the availability of physician assistants to meet the increasing need for mental health care evaluations and services for service members and military families. I'm proud to have helped pass each of these efforts. I believe they're some of the Senate's most important achievements in the past 5 years. The demand for military mental health services has never been greater. It's extremely important we leverage all of our assets in support of our veterans, service members, military families, through legislation like the Sexton Act and the CARE Package. It's critical our support for mental health extends beyond active and guard and reserve duty, and we continue to honor this commitment to our veterans. Another piece of bipartisan legislation I was proud to work on was the Clay Hunt Suicide Prevention for American Veterans Act, signed into law in 2015. This law is key to getting timely and effective mental health care to prevent suicide in our veteran communities. The bill's namesake, Clay Hunt, was a decorated veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan who tragically took his own life after struggling with PTSD and depression. The Clay Hunt SAV Act requires annual third-party evaluations of VA mental health and suicide prevention programs. It creates a centralized website providing information on VA mental health services, and it requires the VA to collaborate on suicide prevention efforts with nonprofit mental health organizations. With our country still facing a rate of more than 20 veterans taking their lives every day, we must continue to find opportunities like these to help prevent veteran suicide and improve the mental health care services available to our heroes. It shouldn't come as a surprise that the law enforcement officers who keep our communities safe often face some of the same stresses that affect our service members and our veterans. It's becoming increasingly common for them to repeatedly experience challenging and even horrific situations on the job. Protecting the psychological health and well-being of those who serve our communities is a critically important issue. With fellow Hoosier Senator Todd Young, I was proud to introduce the Law Enforcement Mental Health and Wellness Act in early April 2017, helped get it through the Senate unanimously in May of 2017, signed into law by President Trump this past January. This bill was inspired in part by Lebanon, Indiana police officer Taylor Nielsen, who in 2016 was called to an horrific crime scene. With the gruesome images from the scene etched in her mind, Taylor began to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder at one point sought to take her own life. Fortunately, her fellow officers recognized her situation, sought help for her, and saved her life before it was too late. The Law Enforcement Mental Health and Wellness Act helps our law enforcement officers get access to the mental health care they need as they keep our communities safe every day. The law authorizes grants to initiate peer mentoring pilot programs. It directs the Departments of Justice and Health and Human Services to develop resources for mental health providers based on the specific mental health challenges faced by law enforcement. And it studies the effectiveness of crisis hotlines and annual mental health checks. It also directs the Departments of Defense and Justice and Veterans Affairs to confer about existing DoD and VA mental health practices and services that could be adopted by our law enforcement agencies. Working together with my colleagues, I'm proud of these successes. But mental health and suicide impact every part of our nation. They don't discriminate. We must look for ways to ensure our workplaces, our schools, and our rural communities to make sure that they have the mental health care and the treatment resources that they need. One critical resource, the National Suicide Hotline. By calling 1-800-273-8255, every American can access free and confidential emotional support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's a wonderful service, and we're working to make it even better. The bipartisan National Suicide Hotline Improvement Act, which I introduced with my friend Senator Hatch, was signed into law a month ago. It will increase the effectiveness of the current suicide prevention lifeline system and the Veterans Crisis Line by requiring the Federal Communications Commission to study the system, to make recommendations. How can we improve it? One of these improvements, seeing whether we can include a 3-digit hotline number that would better connect folks to crucial crisis resources. Now, in the time I've been here on the Senate floor today, just this short time, we've likely lost another American life to suicide. At the current rate, in 12 more minutes, we'll heartbreakingly lose another. As a parent, this is so heartbreaking and so tragic. We have to do whatever we can to prevent these tragedies. 123 Americans every day, 45,000 every year. People who every day could make our lives and our country so much brighter and so much better. It doesn't have to be that way, that they'll be gone. It's incumbent on all of us to harness the sobering reminder of this National Suicide Prevention Month, to ensure that every American knows there's hope, that support is just a call or a conversation away. There are people, there are resources, they are available to help get through any challenges that you have. And you are loved, and you are cared about, and we want to make sure that you have everything you need to get through whatever difficult time you may be facing. I'm proud of these efforts. Proud that we put aside any party politics to address this issue. It affects all of us. Our job's not done, though. We have to exhaust every avenue to provide all of our Americans the support they need to prevent suicide. Let's tackle this program together. Let's be the voice. Mr. President, I yield back.